The Wraith of the Waves. Captain John Big Jack Mallory steered the Sea Lady through the calm waters of the North Atlantic, the sun setting in a blaze of orange and red behind them. It was a quiet evening, the kind that lulled even the most seasoned sailors into a false sense of security. The crew, 5 hardy men including Jack, had been at sea for nearly a week, their haul of fish heavy in the hold. The sea had been kind to them, but it was time to head back to port. "Captain, there's something off the starboard bow," shouted Benny, the young deckhand with a shock of red hair that looked like it was on fire in the twilight. Jack squinted into the distance, his eyes narrowing as he spotted a dark shape looming on the horizon. He grabbed his binoculars and focused on the object, his heart skipping a beat. It was a ship, an old one by the looks of it, drifting aimlessly. "Looks like an old merchant vessel," Jack said, handing the binoculars to his first mate, Tom Bones Harper. "But what's it doing out here?" Bones took a long look, his weathered face growing more serious. "Ain't seen a ship like that in years. Must be a derelict." "Or worse," muttered Big Jack, a feeling of unease settling in his gut. "Let's take a closer look." The crew steered the Sea Lady towards the mysterious vessel, their curiosity piqued despite the gnawing sense of dread. As they approached, the ship's name became visible. The Wraith. It was a fitting moniker, given its ghostly appearance. The hull was encrusted with barnacles, and the sails hung in tatters. A dark, ominous silence seemed to emanate from it, as if the ocean itself was holding its breath. "Captain, I don't like this," said Jimmy, the burly fisherman who rarely showed fear. "Something's not right." "Stay sharp," Jack replied, his voice steady despite his own misgivings. "We'll board her and see if anyone's in trouble. Could be someone needs our help." They pulled alongside the Wraith, and Jack led the way up a rope ladder. As soon as his feet hit the deck, the foul stench of decay assaulted his senses, making him gag. The rest of the crew climbed aboard, their faces turning pale as they took in the sight. The deck was a scene from a nightmare. Bloodstains, dark and crusted, covered the planks. Rotting flesh hung in tatters from the rigging, and skeletal remains lay scattered about, their bony fingers frozen in silent screams. "Dear God," whispered Bones, crossing himself. "What the hell happened here?" muttered Benny, his eyes wide with horror. "We need to find out," Jack said, his voice firm. "Stay together and keep your eyes open." They moved cautiously through the ship, the old wood creaking under their weight. The air grew colder the deeper they went, the darkness seeming to close in around them. The stench of death grew stronger, making it hard to breathe. In the galley, they found more bodies, some still sitting at tables, as if they'd been caught in the middle of a meal. The food was long gone, replaced by a black, mouldy substance that pulsed as if alive. "This ain't natural," Jimmy said, backing away from the sight. "This ship's cursed, I tell you." "Let's check the captain's quarters," Jack said, trying to keep the fear out of his voice. "Maybe there's a logbook or something that can tell us what happened." The captain's quarters were at the stern of the ship. The door was ajar, and as they entered, the temperature dropped further, their breath misting in the air. The room was in disarray with papers and charts scattered everywhere. On the desk, they found the ship's log. Jack picked it up, the leather cover cold and slick with moisture. He flipped it open, skimming through the entries. The last one was dated over 50 years ago. "Found a strange artifact in the cargo hold," Jack read aloud. "Captain ordered it brought aboard. Since then, the crew's been falling ill. Strange noises at night. Some swear they've seen shadows moving. Last entry. God forgive us. We've unleashed something terrible." A chill ran down Jack's spine. "We need to get off this ship, now." But as they turned to leave, the door slammed shut with a force that shook the walls. The lights flickered, casting eerie shadows that danced and writhed. The air grew thick with the sound of whispers, unintelligible, but filled with malice. "Who's there?" Jack shouted, his voice echoing in the confined space. The whispers stopped, replaced by a low, guttural growl. The shadows coalesced, forming a dark, menacing shape that seemed to pulse with hatred. It moved towards them, the temperature dropping even further. "Run!" Jack yelled, pushing his crew towards the door. They stumbled out of the captain's quarters, the shadowy presence following close behind. The ship seemed to come alive around them, the walls groaning and the floorboards buckling. As they reached the deck, the entity lunged, wrapping itself around Benny. "No!" Benny screamed, his voice filled with terror. "Help me!" But there was nothing they could do. The shadow enveloped him, and Benny's screams were cut off abruptly, replaced by the sickening sound of flesh tearing. Blood sprayed across the deck, and when the shadow retreated, all that was left of Benny was a bloody smear. "Dear God," Bones whispered, his face ashen. "We have to get out of here." They ran for the rope ladder, but the entity was relentless. It took Jimmy next, dragging him into the darkness of the lower deck. His screams echoed through the ship, mingling with the sinister whispers. Jack and Bones made it to the side of the Wraith, but as they reached the ladder, Bones was yanked backwards, his fingers clawing at the air. Jack turned just in time to see the entity consume him, his body crumpling into a heap of blood and bone. "No!" Jack screamed, grabbing the ladder and descending as fast as he could. He hit the deck of the Sea Lady, his heart pounding in his chest. The ship rocked violently, the Wraith seeming to pull it closer. Jack cut the lines, pushing the Sea Lady away from the cursed vessel. The shadowy figure watched from the deck, its eyes glowing with an unholy light. As the distance grew, the whispers faded and the oppressive cold lifted. Alone and shaken, Jack steered the Sea Lady back towards port, his mind reeling from the horrors he had witnessed. He never spoke of the Wraith again, but the memory of that night haunted him for the rest of his days. Years later, sailors spoke in hushed tones of a ghost ship that roamed the North Atlantic, its deck stained with blood and its halls echoing with the screams of the damned. And those who were unlucky enough to cross its path were never seen again. The Phantom of the Sable Star. Captain Thomas Graves stood on the deck of the Night Star, a seasoned cargo ship, as it navigated through the turbulent waters of the North Atlantic. The night was dark and stormy, the kind of night that sailors feared. The sea was a churning beast, and the wind howled like a banshee. The crew, hardened men who had seen their share of storms, moved with a nervous energy. "Keep her steady, lads," Graves shouted over the roar of the storm. He was a man of few fears, but the tales of ghost ships that haunted these waters lingered at the back of his mind. Superstitions ran deep in the maritime world, and he had heard too many stories of ships appearing out of nowhere, crewed by the dead and doomed to sail forever. As the Night Star pressed on, First Mate Jenkins approached Graves, his face pale. "Captain, there's something off the starboard bow. A ship, I think." Graves squinted into the darkness. Lightning flashed, illuminating the sea for a brief moment, and there it was, a massive, ancient vessel, its sails tattered and its hull covered in barnacles. It looked like it had been adrift for centuries. "Bring us closer," Graves ordered, curiosity overcoming caution. "But keep your distance. We don't know what we're dealing with." As they neared the ghostly ship, the air grew colder, and an unnatural silence fell over the Night Star. The storm seemed to retreat, as if afraid to approach the eerie vessel. The crew gathered at the rails, their faces a mixture of fear and fascination. "She's the Phantom of the Sable Star," Jenkins whispered, eyes wide. "I've heard tales of her. Vanished over 100 years ago with all hands lost. They say she roams the seas looking for souls to claim." Graves nodded, the name ringing a distant bell. "I've heard the stories too, but stories are all they are. We need to see if there's anyone alive aboard." A small boarding party was assembled. Graves, Jenkins, and 3 others climbed into a lifeboat and rowed towards the ghost ship. As they neared, the air grew colder still, and the smell of decay and rot filled their nostrils. "Hold steady," Graves commanded, though his voice betrayed his own unease. They climbed up the ship's side and onto the deck, which was slick with algae and scattered with debris. The wood creaked underfoot and the silence was deafening. "Hello?" Graves called out, his voice echoing. "Is anyone there?" No answer came, only the sound of the sea gently lapping against the hull. The crew spread out, exploring the deck and the cabins. Everywhere they looked, there were signs of sudden and violent abandonment, half-eaten meals, personal belongings strewn about, and the skeletal remains of the crew. In the captain's cabin, Graves found an old logbook. The last entry was dated 1864, and spoke of a strange fog that had enveloped the ship. The captain had written of ghostly apparitions and crew members vanishing in the night. "We need to leave," Jenkins said, his voice trembling. "This place is cursed." Graves nodded. "You're right. Let's get back to the Night Star and be done with this." As they made their way back to the lifeboat, the wind began to howl again, and the ship seemed to come alive with a malevolent energy. Shadows moved at the edge of their vision, and whispers filled the air. "Hurry!" Graves urged. But as they reached the rail, a terrible force slammed into them, sending Jenkins and one of the sailors overboard. The others struggled to hold on as the ship lurched violently. Graves shouted for help, but the Night Star was already pulling away, caught in the grip of a sudden, unnatural current. He watched in horror as his ship and crew vanished into the darkness, leaving him stranded on the ghost ship. Desperate, Graves and the remaining sailor, Thompson, tried to launch the lifeboat, but it was no use. The oars were missing, and the boat itself seemed anchored to the deck by some invisible force. "We're trapped," Thompson said, his face ashen. "We're never getting off this ship." Graves refused to give in to despair. There has to be a way. Keep searching. They spent hours combing the ship, but the more they searched, the more the ship seemed to shift and change, like a living labyrinth. The sense of being watched grew stronger, and the shadows seemed to close in around them. Finally, exhausted and hopeless, they returned to the captain's cabin. Graves opened the logbook again, hoping to find some clue they had missed. As he read, a chill ran down his spine. The last entries spoke of the crew's descent into madness, driven by the relentless whispers and ghostly apparitions. And then, Graves saw it, a line that hadn't been there before. "The ship demands a sacrifice. Only then will it release its hold." Graves looked up at Thompson, who had seen the same words. "What does it mean?" Thompson whispered, though he already knew. "The ship is alive," Graves said slowly, the horror of it sinking in. "It wants one of us to stay. Only then will it let the other go." Thompson's eyes widened in terror. "No, we can't. There has to be another way." But even as he spoke, the shadows in the room grew darker, and the whispering voices grew louder, more insistent. The ship was demanding its due. Graves felt a terrible resignation settle over him. "Thompson, listen to me. One of us has to do it. It's the only way." Thompson shook his head, backing away. "No, I won't. I can't." But the ship gave them no choice. The shadows closed in, and the voices rose to a deafening crescendo. In a final, desperate act, Graves lunged at Thompson, intending to subdue him and offer himself to the ship. But Thompson fought back, and in the struggle, Graves was thrown to the floor. As he lay there, dazed, he saw the shadows converge on Thompson, dragging him screaming into the darkness. The voices fell silent, and the air grew still. The ship seemed to release a long, satisfied sigh. Graves, shaken and alone, made his way back to the deck. The lifeboat was there, the oars restored. He climbed in and rowed away, the ghost ship receding into the mist. When he finally reached the Sable Star, the crew was there to pull him aboard. "Captain, what happened?" Jenkins asked, his face pale. Graves looked back at the ghost ship, now barely visible in the distance. "We were fools," he said quietly. "We disturbed something that should have been left alone. Let's get out of here and pray we never see that ship again." As the Night Star sailed away, Graves couldn't shake the feeling that the ghost ship was still watching, waiting for its next victim. And deep down he knew that no one who encountered the phantom of the Sable Star ever truly escaped.
Bloody Mary's Horror Stories. Watch